Hi everyone, this is Chris Young. I'm a photographer and a member of PhotoShelter's marketing staff, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, Build a Better Online Portfolio. We're very fortunate to have Pulitzer Prize-winning photo editor and consultant Stella Kramer with us here today, and we've got a lot of great content to cover, so I'm going to turn it right over to Stella.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank PhotoShelter for this opportunity, and let's get right to it. So just to give you some ideas to who I am, I started with a temp job in the photo department at Vanity Fair. Just by chance fell into that, had no idea that there was such a thing, and then did a little bit of temp work at Time Inc. before I worked for People magazine, Sports Illustrated magazine as a photo editor. Then I went off to Newsweek, where I went on staff for about 3.5 years, covering pretty much everything from the Winter Olympics to, well, to the Waco, Texas craziness. Then to Entertainment Weekly, I worked at a fashion magazine, Mirabella, and finally landed once again in a staff position at Brill's Content magazine for several years. After that, I went to the New York Times as a photo editor, and it was there where the Pulitzer Prizes ended up being a part of my resume. After 9/11, I worked on the Portraits of Grief, and the Pulitzers that the New York Times won at that time, two of them were for work I had been a part of. One was breaking news photography, and the other was public service, which was the Portraits of Grief work. I worked at the New York Times for almost 4 years, did a little bit of photo editing after that, and then went into business on my own as a photo consultant, working with photographers to help them strengthen their points of view, their eye, tighten their portfolios and websites, and give career advice and help people figure out how to navigate themselves to the profession that they wanted to have. So that's a little bit about who I am. My contact information, if you want to reach me, my website, my email, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and the like. Now let's get right into this. First question that I think it's really important that every photographer asks, whether you're a beginner, whether you've been in the business for a long time and are looking to reinvent yourself, is who are you looking to reach? Who is your audience? The more you can be clear about that, the better chance that you have to fashion a marketing and a strategy for your business that'll help you out. Are you the beginning of your career? Are you a student? Are you looking to reformat what you've been doing? Are you working and yet find that avenues that you might have pursued in the past are closing to you, and so you're looking in other directions? You need to make that decision, because the more specific you can focus your attentions, the better it is going to work for you. If you cast a wide net these days, it's not going to be to your advantage. So if you want to work in commercial work, that's what you should focus on. If you want to do editorial, you should be sure of who you want to be working for and how you get there.
Stella, do you generally recommend that photographers pick one niche to specialize in on their websites? Because I know a lot of us out there, we like to shoot many different things, and we may even have very good work in a number of different categories. So what do you say to the photographer who has a few different things they'd like to focus on?
Well, the first thing is shoot what you want to be shooting. A lot of photographers are all over the place, but they don't necessarily want to be doing some of the things they're doing. They just do it because they think they should, or they think they can get work in that. I think more success comes when you do things that you want to be doing, because then you can be very specific in how you market yourself. So it's okay to do more than one thing, but you have to really like it, because just focusing on something because you think it's going to be a path to making money generally doesn't end up working out well for you. So decide what it is you want to be shooting. I mean, you can shoot portraits and sports and work in advertising and editorial. So one is not, doesn't necessarily negate the other. It's more that you really need to ask yourself these questions, and I find that a lot of photographers don't. They just begin shooting, they shoot whatever opportunity comes up for them, and that's what they put out there. And yet it's easy for people who are on the other side of the fence, photo editors, art buyers, to be able to tell what somebody really likes doing. And those are the photographers they want to work with. They want to work with people in the realm of what they like doing, because they know they're going to get better work out of them as a result. Now, part of figuring out who you are, what you want to be doing, also requires a lot of research on your part as a photographer. It's not as simple as just saying, I want to shoot for the New York Times Sunday magazine, or I want to do the next Nike commercial. You know, you really need to find out who is doing what you want to be doing. Who are the photo editors at the New York Times Magazine? Have you really looked at the magazine to see the kind of stories they do, the kind of work they do? Do you look at the bylines to see whether it's been assigned to them or whether it's been pickup photography, meaning stock photography that already exists? Do you read blogs? Are you in touch with the industry as a whole? Because these days you don't have to live in New York or LA or Chicago. You can live anywhere and be very, very closely in touch with what's going on in the photography world. If no other reason, then there are blogs that you can log into and read on a regular basis that will tell you who's exhibiting, who's got portfolio reviews, who's doing work of various kinds. And that's the sort of information that you really need to have if you're looking to have a successful career. You need to look at an ad campaign if you want to be a commercial photographer, find out what company handled the account, what photo editor or art buyer handled the account, and what photographer shot it. So you can start understanding what's going on and then figuring out where you can fit into it. If you live in any major city, you can be going to gallery openings. There's a lot of ways to plug in that no longer require you to be in a certain geographic location. You can be in Europe, you can be in Asia, you can be in Africa, anywhere, and be in touch with what's happening and know sort of what people are doing and what people are looking for. And that's a really important part of having a professional career. You're basically ultimately looking to create relationships with people, whether they're art buyers, whether they're photo editors, reps, studio managers. It's the relationship that'll really make a difference. As personal a relationship as you can have. If you can meet people, that's the best. If you can't meet people, you can create relationships with them. You can compliment them on work they've already done. If you see a shoot in a magazine that you think is particularly great, get a hold of the magazine, find out who the photo editor is, drop them a line, tell them that you really like the work, or even drop a line to the photographer and tell them you like the work. Start creating relationships because opportunities come from that. And the more you can be out there, the better it's going to end up for you. And since these days you can get yourself out there in so many different ways through the internet, you can create relationships without ever meeting people, whether it's Facebook or you follow people's tweets. However you do it, you can create these relationships that ultimately can lead to two things. They can, one, give you a chance to ask questions about the industry that you need to find out about, and also can eventually maybe get you work, and that's a really important thing. Another part of relationships is portfolio reviews, which are kind of controversial in the industry. However, I'm a proponent of them, but it's important for two reasons. One, you can get face-to-face meetings with people who have no time to meet with you any other way. And two, if you have a good body of work, you can get perspective on it that you might not get any other way. And there are portfolio reviews everywhere, from New York to Virginia to Santa Fe, Houston, Palm Springs, West Palm Beach, Portland, Europe. I mean, you don't have to necessarily be in a major city or in New York to be able to sit down with big-time art buyers, big-time photo editors, and make the personal contact and create a relationship that might end up giving you work. So those are really important things, I find. Now, all of this being said, there are some really important serious questions you need to ask yourself. One is to really figure out what your goals are. What do you ultimately want to be doing? Not what can you do, but what do you want to be doing? Because you want to create a career that has aspiration as part of it. That's what a career is about. If you just want to get work, that's fine too, and you can find, and there are other ways to do that. You can go to local businesses, see if you can get work. You can do any kind of thing, family portraits. There's nothing wrong with any of it, but you have to decide, do I want a career that has the possibility of spanning a good part of my lifetime? And in that case, you need to have career goals. They can change as you go along, as you develop, but you should have something to shoot for. I mean, I know that's a pun and I didn't mean it that way. You need to have timelines for when you're going to achieve things, whether it's a marketing campaign. When am I going to send out promo cards? When am I going to get my website together? When am I going to make contact with such and such place, such and such art buyer? You need to look around at the work that's being done and see who does work that's in the similar vein to you, but not in order to copy them. Because a magazine that has someone shoot for them or an ad campaign that has someone shoot for them is not looking for someone to recreate that kind of imagery. They already have that. So you need to think about what makes you unique. what you can bring to the table that the other person or any other person probably doesn't. And that's important, that it's partly your aesthetic, but that's not all of what it is. It's your energy, it's your professionalism, it's your follow through, it's your ability to be the kind of person that other people want to work with.
And Stella, do you have any advice for the photographer who doesn't have those assignments, who wants to demonstrate to their potential clients um, all of their good properties in terms of their ability to follow through, their ability to be easy and reliable and professional, and just a great person to work with?
Well, you can, without having been published anywhere, you can do shoots. You can find interesting people anywhere that you live and photograph them. You can do a story about someone in your town who has a fascinating story to tell, and most people do if you ask them about it. And you can photograph them, and you can show a body of work that is really substantial, that maybe hasn't been printed, but that shows that you have a curiosity about the world, that you have the ability to see things and see how to make them into something that people will be captivated by. And then in the personal relationship, do you follow through? You know, if you meet someone, do you drop them a line a week later? If you've had something happen or you've redone your website, do you let them know about it? All those things are part of what tells someone who buys photography or hires photography that you are invested in your own career. And if you're invested in your career, then they're going to feel more comfortable with investing in you. Somebody who says you need to know how to talk about what you do, what kind of work you do, what kind of photographer you are, because too many people just say, well, I shoot everything. Well, that doesn't tell me anything about you. I want to know something about you. You know, not everybody needs to have blogs or tweet or whatever. You have to decide if that's for you, but you have to be able to say, I'm engaged in what I'm doing in a way that I'm going to stick with this. I love doing this. All of that really separates you from the masses, because we all know there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of photographers, but very few people who really have made a commitment to themselves to see their career through and look to learn and to challenge themselves and to meet people and to put themselves out there. Not as many people do that, and that's the difference between having a career and shooting. You know, a lot of people shoot, but are you a professional photographer? That's not just, did I get paid for my work? It's how I approach my career, and that's a really important thing. You know, and as far as these other points of, you know, being aware that something that you see, you feel you can do that, well, your work has to reflect the ability to do that. You don't want to just look at an ad campaign and say, well, I of course could shoot that, but really what your portfolio shows is that you shoot sports, you know, or you shoot birds, and yet you're looking at a fashion campaign saying, oh, I can do that. Well, you have to show a relationship between what you want to do and what you're doing now. You don't need to have been published. You don't need to live in a major city. You don't need to have a lot of money. You can ask friends, neighbors, people that you know in your town, people that you introduce yourself to create a body of work and to create a unique aesthetic for yourself that can separate your work from other people. So now we're going to start talking about the portfolio itself, the online portfolio. These are probably the three most important things to me: that your work appears on the page and that the page itself is clean, which means that it doesn't have a lot of extraneous clutter that's unnecessary. A title and a subhead, too many categories, all sorts of things that can clutter up a page and make it confusing for the person looking at it, because you're looking to basically sell yourself with your portfolio, whether it's for assignments, whether it's for advertising campaigns, or whether it's just to establish yourself as a photographer. So you need to think from the other point of view, which is, if somebody's looking at this, what are they thinking? You might want to have explanations for things, captions for stories on your site, and you need to decide, are they really necessary for somebody to appreciate the photography? The other thing is, things should be clear. Navigation is very important. You need to be able to go, the person who's viewing needs to be able to go where they want to go. so that they know how to get back home if they want to, so that things load in a good amount of time, because you can just judge it by yourself. How long do you spend looking at a screen that's loading before you go somewhere else? Because everything we're dealing with here has to do a lot with the psychology of how we navigate media these days. And all of us know that everything has been sped up for us.
And Stella, just from your personal experience and your career as a photo editor, how long, just because I find this personally interesting, how long will you actually wait for someone's site to load before you just go, I have better things to do?
Well, that's a good question. If it's the first picture coming up on the site, not long. Because if I haven't already decided I want to see the rest of your work, I'm not going to wait around. Some people have an image that shows up before you get into their work. And if I'm waiting for that, generally 2 seconds, 3 seconds, I'm gone. I mean, think about it this way. When you're sitting on the couch watching TV and you have a remote in your hand, you're clicking through the channels. How long really does it take before you know what's on the screen and you've made a decision whether you're staying there or not? Almost instantaneous. So it's that way when you look at a website. You can pretty well tell, am I going to want to stay here or not? And generally, it's going to be seconds. So if all the images take a long time to load, and a long time in this relationship we're talking about is 2 or 3 seconds, people will leave, because if you want people who work in offices to look at your work, they've got so much work to do that they just don't have the time. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when you're putting your site together. You want it to load, you want to be able to say, pow, here I am. That's a really important thing. Now, this said, I personally have a list of things that I really don't like. And when I see these things, unless there's another reason for it, I will leave the website. First of all, I personally do not understand black backgrounds. I think people think that their web page pops if the background is black, but very, very often it's counterintuitive, but the photo will meld into the background. It will not pop out. I prefer white backgrounds. It's clean, it's fresh. It gives me a sense of optimism and positivity that makes me want to continue. And like I said, if we're talking about how people view things, there's a psychology there. Having a black background does not necessarily make your work more important. That's important to keep in mind, especially if your work is dense, if your work is very colorful, very emotional. It doesn't add a weight. It takes away from the experience of looking at it. And it can actually bring down the person who's looking at it in a way where they can't necessarily explain it. So I hate black backgrounds, except in certain situations. Nothing is 100%. You know, if everything was the same, everybody would be doing well. So things are there, you know, there are little, exceptions to the rule. I do not like watermarks, and I really don't know any other photo editors who do, especially watermarks that are across the middle of the image. If you are that worried about people stealing your work, then maybe your work shouldn't be online. And there are photographers who don't have websites. They have portfolio books. So it isn't unheard of to not have a website. But having a watermark specifically in the middle of an image makes the viewer feel that you don't trust them, and that is a bad way to start out. That said, if you're going to have a watermark at the bottom of the image, if I really wanted to steal it, I could and just crop that out. So what's the point of that? So you really have to decide if you're willing to trust the world, because that's what it comes down to. And if you're not, that's okay. You need to find an alternative way, because I don't know of a photo editor who will look at anybody's site who has watermarks on their images. Even if they're what you consider in the background of the image, it mars the experience, and it sends a bad message to the person who you want to hire you. The long-winded about pages. Now, I like knowing about you. If you have a sense of humor, that's fantastic, but I don't need to know everything about you. I don't need to know where you grew up, where you went to school, where you live, all of your experiences. The best about pages are short, to the point. Like I said, if you have a sense of humor that you can put in the writing that you do, that's great. But some people write about pages and they go from the first to the third to the second person, and it becomes really confusing. More information about you is not going to make me like your images anymore. But shorter about pages give me a sense of who you are. There's a difference between the two. There are some people whose websites have tiny little fonts in places, and even with my glasses, I have trouble reading them. So I will leave the website because I don't understand the point of that. And that means that sometimes in the category, sometimes in where they'll name a subcategory, sometimes in a caption, it will be so tiny that it bothers me to even see it. And then I wonder what the point of it is. So make sure your fonts are readable for people, even people who wear glasses. The other problem, and this goes back to the easy to navigate, some websites make it impossible to figure out how to get home. You know, you're going through the images, you're not crazy about it, you want to go to a different category, but you can't figure out how to do that. And it's so bizarre when it happens, but I have found myself in that situation with websites occasionally, and I hate it. And anything that somebody viewing your site doesn't like will not reflect well on you. So you have to think beyond yourself in putting your images on your website. You have to think about the audience you're putting it out there for. That's really important. That said, and as I said before, there are no hard and fast rules. We wish there were, there aren't. But you don't want too many categories on your portfolio. Sometimes people will have 10 to 15 categories because they've been shooting a ton of stuff. It just becomes overwhelming for the viewer to deal with. There's a sense when I look at a website where there are too many categories and, in addition, too many images, where I feel like it's going to take such a commitment from me, and I don't have that time that I don't even want to begin. So be careful. Just because you have a lot of work doesn't mean it all has to be there. In fact, holding work back and using it to refresh your portfolio periodically is the best way to do it. Too many images, the more work you show me is not going to make me want to hire you more. There is a tendency that people have, and I'm not exactly sure why, to think the more proof they give you that they shoot or that they know how to shoot, the more it will mean I will want you to shoot for me. Really, as an art buyer, as a photo editor, you want to hire somebody who within a small period of time with their images can tell you who they are and can make you excited about looking at what they've got to offer. And you're not going to be excited with 10 categories, 40 images in a category. I mean, that's already 400 images on a site. Way too much for your professional site. If you have a lot of images and you really want people to have access to them, you can put that on a personal site and not direct business to it. Or you can hold it back and use it as material that you can use to refresh your work. And that's terrific. Because I don't know when you shot something, so you might think it's old, but how would I know? Chris, you want to say something?
Stella, how many images do you personally like to see in a portfolio?
Well, in a category, for me, around 15 images is enough. Because if I can't tell what I think of you by then, I don't know that I'm going to be able to if you throw another 5 or 10 images in there. And what ends up happening for a lot of photographers is the work ends up being repetitious. And so I just feel that the photographer themselves don't really understand what they're doing. And it's a hard thing to explain, but the tighter your edit is, the more sense I get that you know who you are. And that's the kind of photographer I would want to hire. The same thing with categories. A couple of categories, 3, 4 categories, that's fine. One of them can be your portfolio. One of them can be projects where maybe you have essays that you've done. One of them can be personal work, which is totally different than everything else, but everyone loves looking at that. You know, you might be a conflict shooter, but your personal work is still life. Fantastic. That gives me more of a sense of who you are. And that's what people like to look at. But if you're categorizing everything, it's not going to be as effective. And that said, how you name your categories, I like straightforward. I know in the fine art world, people will title their categories in order to reflect a body of work. That's a very individual thing. I prefer to have categories to be clear, and subcategories, the place where you would do something like that. Because then I know what I'm dealing with. If you have 4 categories and one is called I love fish, and another one is called walking in the sand, I don't really know what's going on here. But if you have a category that says projects or essays, and in that I see the subcategories, I know what I'm looking at, and then I can jump in. And that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to give people a reason to dive in and experience looking at your work and finding out who you are. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that there is a difference between your online presence and your portfolio book. Each of them have a different role. And so I always suggest that there's something in each one that's different than in the other, so that each experience is a singular experience for the person who sees it. Because if you look through someone's portfolio book, then you go to their website and it's exactly the same, you feel like you've wasted your time. But the portfolio is a place where you really have to have a tight edit. The website is a place that gives you a little bit more chance to put things in the way, present them in the way you want to, whether it's an essay, whether it's additional images. However, that's what the web is good for, but you don't want to go overboard to the other side, which is everything you've ever shot, every image from every shoot you've done. So now we get into the most difficult thing of all. And believe me, every photographer has this problem. So you're a community of people with the same creative challenge. You're too close to your own material. And because of that, it's hard to do things to be objective about your own work. And that's okay. Nobody holds it against you unless you're closed off to getting feedback and critique. If I'm looking at your work, if I'm working in an office, I'm overloaded with work, I'm on deadlines all over the place, I can pretty much tell who a photographer is in the first couple of images that I look at. Now, if it's a really great photographer, I will want to look at more. And it will be somebody that I might recommend to an art director or a creative director. But that's the professional eye that an art buyer, a photo editor has. So it doesn't mean put the 5 great images in the front and have the rest of the book or the portfolio be crap, because that won't help you either. But I can pretty well tell if somebody is a good shooter, a professional shooter, and has an aesthetic, a clear aesthetic that makes me want to work with them. You need to differentiate yourself from other photographers, and that's where the aesthetic comes in. Is your eye different? That's what art buyers and photo editors look for. They look for someone who can make an artistic statement that makes them unique. Because if they already have somebody who shoots a certain way, they're not looking for another person who does the same stuff. They're looking for someone who's fresh, who's different, who brings a different point of view. So do you have an aesthetic? Do you know what your aesthetic is? Sometimes people don't, and they need to keep shooting and really challenging themselves in order to find that. When you put up your work on the web, you don't want to put up 5 images from the same shoot. There's really no reason for that, and what that tends to tell professionals who hire photographers is that you're padding your work to make it look like you have more experience than you have. Now that said, I've seen examples of people who will do a diptych, meaning 2 images from the same shoot that are different side by side, or even a triptych, 3 images that way. If they work, that's fine. But I do see a lot of people who will use several shots of something because they think that they're all great and they couldn't decide, and the professional looking at it will go, well, this is the good one, and these others I don't really like.
Stella, do you have an opinion on either the same image living in one portfolio category under, let's say, portraits, and then using that same image or a near frame or a like image in a different portfolio category, or, for instance, a photo essay online on the same website?
That's a really good question. I was talking with a photographer about this just the other day. I don't want to see the same image in more than one category. If you have images and essays or projects, that's how they should be presented. If you don't have enough work to be able to have what is essentially a single image portfolio, then you shouldn't have one. But it doesn't serve you well for somebody to see the same image more than once, because taking it out of the context of the essay or the project first would make me think that you thought that was the good picture. In which case, why do I want to look at the rest of it? Because you're devaluing the rest of the images to me. So I would say if you want to have a portfolio online that has single images together, and then have an area that has projects or essays, the images should be different. Now, when you edit your work, it doesn't have to always be that way for the rest of your life. The great thing about the web is that you can change it. You can refresh it. You can take things off of it. You can put things onto it. You can just change the sequence of the images, and that can refresh your portfolio. People don't realize that that can be done, and they don't think to do that. So if somebody has looked at your website, and then 6 months later you want them to look again, and they look and it's all the same as they looked at 6 months before, that's not good. If you even just shift the sequencing of the images, they will think they're looking at something that's new and fresh. And that's really important, and that bodes well for you. Sequencing is what I think the most important thing of putting a portfolio together. Your portfolio, whether it's your book or your website, should tell a story of who you are and who you want to be. When somebody looks at your site or looks at your portfolio book, they're looking for a short period of time where they're sort of away from their own work, where they can be taken on a little bit of a journey with your work, whether it's you shoot like you do, Chris, you shoot concerts, I can feel like I'm there, I'm in the crowd, or you shoot landscapes and I can imagine I'm lying on that beach, or you shoot food and I can think, ooh, yeah, that would be so good right now. Or it's a portrait or a series of portraits and I can think, wow, how interesting that setting is or that person looks. It's to give me a moment away from what I'm doing, almost like a little vacation. So as you read a book, you can tell when a book doesn't have good sequencing. It's as if you read chapter 1, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 47, and then chapter 2. You don't know what's going on. Photographers who figure out how to sequence their work come across as the most professional photographers. And even if their work isn't the best work, it will still reflect really well on them. A photographer, no matter how good they are, that has a portfolio that's really badly sequenced, it won't reflect well on them, because the experience of looking at their work will not be a pleasant one. It is also the hardest thing for people to do with their own work, because your connection to your work is much different than an outsider looking at your work. You like pictures because of the experience, because of the colors in it, whatever, and you're loathed to lose that, or you want pictures to go together because it was the same day that you were shooting. Relationships that have no meaning for people who are outside the viewer. So in order to make a story, to get an objective outside eye, you really have to think about the person looking at your work, not just your work and how you're presenting it. So that will lead you to look for people to give you an objective look at your work, to say what they think, because they don't have a connection to it. And that's a really important thing. In order to make a good portfolio, whether it is online or whether it's a book, you need to think of the person who's going to be viewing it, and you need to get feedback from people who are not connected, not your assistant and not your best friend that you told the whole story to about the day that you shot whatever it is that you want to have people look at. You want people who have no connection, who can just say, wow, or, oh, what's that about? Because that will be the best thing that can happen to you. Don't be afraid of having people look at your work. A lot of photographers, strangely enough, are afraid of people looking at their work. They're afraid people won't like them, won't like it. And if you're going to be a photographer, you have to stand up and say, this is my work, like any artist would do. And if you want to be hired, you have to be willing to have people say, I don't like it, I don't understand it. But they can say that and still love the experience of looking at it. You know, you can go to a museum and look at a bunch of art that you don't really get, you don't really like, but there's something about it that you enjoy the process of seeing it. And that's what you need to think about in terms of your portfolio. So now we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. The old bigger isn't always better. However, I like big images. I do. I was saying, Chris, I really like your website because I feel like I'm in the event when I'm looking at the pictures on your website. I'm there because I'm just pulled into it. A lot of photographers will have their pictures really small, a lot of white space around it or a lot of border around it. And I don't understand why they're giving up the real estate of the page to everything but their photo. Photos that are very dense don't look good when they're small. They look better when they're big. And that said, I don't necessarily need to see a cup of coffee huge on a page. So bigger doesn't always work, but you need to decide as the photographer which way my work appears better. Don't let the template determine it for you. It might not be the right template. Decide, are my pictures better large, small, or a mixture of the two?
And just for people listening, the pictures on my website, which is onelouderphoto.com, are I think they're about 600 pixels wide, and I arrived at that particular size because I thought it was a good match for my work. It's the photos aren't too dense and they're not too sort of expansive in space that they should be either too big or too much bigger or too much smaller than that.
Well, you spent time thinking about that. A lot of people put their work on their web page and the work is just too precious to them. And so it's presented in a way almost as if the frame is more important than the image itself. It's almost like there's a giant mat that they're using around their photo. You need to think about which way your photos look better. Just because you have verticals, don't make everything really small. Figure out how to make it work better. That's a really important thing. As I said before, photo editors, art buyers, they want to be a part, they want to fall into the image. They really love looking at photography and they love being swept up in the photography. So give them an experience where they can have that, even if it's only for 5 minutes that they're there. Because if you do, then when they have extra time, they'll take the time to go through it again and go through it slowly. I think we all know that when we look at imagery, whether it's on the street, whether it's on television, whether it's on the web, we have an emotional connection. There are things that we will like and we don't know why. There are things we like that we don't even want to admit to, little kitten pictures or babies or, all kinds of things or color. Some people want to give the idea that they're only interested in serious photography. It's like people saying that they only watch public television when really what they like to watch is reality TV. So you want to create an emotional connection for the viewer because that helps them to want to work with you and want to know you and more about you. If they look at your site and they forget it right after they look at it, then you're doing something wrong. You want it to be bookmarked if nothing else. And the more you create a relationship, even through the computer with the person viewing it, the better it's going to be for you. And since a lot of people spend the majority of their days in front of a screen, it's even more important now to find a way to create a relationship between people who look at your work and people who will hire you.
And Stella, do you recommend that photographers, and I know I'm guilty of this myself with my own work, I can't separate myself enough to be able to even say which of the five first images um, are the best for
Mhm,
forming that emotional
mhm.
connection because I personally have such a strong emotional connection to every one of my
Sure.
photos and arguably, too close a connection.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's natural. I mean, I would think it was weird if you didn't have that kind of connection to your own work, although some people don't. Um, this is where you need to get help, basically. Whether you need to hire a consultant to work with, whether you need to get together with a bunch of photographer friends and critique each other's work honestly, you need to do this because your only investment in your career is not your camera and not what you pay for your domain name. It's more than that. And a lot of photographers stop there and they think, okay, I've done that. Now I'm just going to throw all my work out there and we'll see what happens. That's a recipe for intense frustration and rarely success. So if you can't do it yourself, admit that. You know, the first thing is admitting you have a problem. But don't feel bad about it, because if it wasn't that way for all artists, there would not be art critics, there would not be book editors, and there are. Writers know they need somebody to edit their work. Artists don't exist in a vacuum, you know? So think of yourself as an artist and realize that you need, whether it's professional help from an outside professional who's in the industry, or whether you can get that real feedback from a group of people, that you're being honest with each other. And none of this has to be mean, and none of this has to hurt anybody's feelings. But you need to be open to the fact that even though it's your work, you're not the first and the last determinant of what it is and what it should be. And you can really, really get a lot of great information from other people and open yourself up to hearing what they have to say, because those photographers who do that tend to feel so much easier about what they're doing, because there's a sense of lightness when you've sort of removed yourself and put yourself in the hands of somebody who knows what they're talking about. You don't have to feel that pressure of, what is people thinking when they look at my site? Do they like me? Do they like my work? You know, because honestly, there's a difference between you and your work, but it's hard for you because it's what you care about. You know, I can like a photographer and hate their work. I can love someone's work and hate the photographer. I mean, seriously, it's really true. I mean, granted, I'm not going to work with someone I don't like, no matter how good their work is. But you can't separate yourself from your work, and you probably shouldn't. But you should be open to hearing what other people think when they look at your work. And you should be open to the suggestions people make, and you should really think about what they say to you and then make the decision for yourself as to whether that has validity or not. But being honest with yourself. Don't just hear something and not like what the person says and just dismiss it. Because people like myself, I have a lot of experience to back up what I'm saying. So I don't claim to be the one end all be all, but I do really expect people to at least think about what I'm saying, weigh it, and make a decision from that. Because if you've made a decision based on research, based on hearing other people's attitudes, then you're going to make a good decision, and it's going to benefit you. We're going to look at a couple of sites now and talk about a couple of changes that I would make suggestions for them. Phil is a photojournalist student at Colorado University Boulder. And I guess his PhotoShelter template is called Nolita, which would resonate with everybody in New York. Now, I looked at this site and I was really struck by the photo essay that Phil has called Diagnosed. It's an essay of his own struggle with being diagnosed with MS. I think this is incredibly powerful, but it's unfinished. And it needs to have more to it, because as much as I'm a believer in tight edits, 8 is not enough. But this is an amazing story, and it's beautifully photographed, and he has a real ability to tell a story, but there's a longer story here, and I think he needs to tell more of it. At the same time, he has another category that he calls editorial. And this one doesn't have the same resonance for me. It takes away from the other category because it's a series of images that are unconnected, completely unconnected. And for me, tell me that this is a very beginning photographer. If he wants to be shooting sports, then he should concentrate with that. But these unconnected images strung together just because he's done them don't add value to his site and to the possibility of his career. Personally, I would remove these images and I would concentrate on the diagnosed story, and then maybe go to another story, another essay, and present those as his work, because he's a strong photographer and I like his site. Pictures a good size, white, right to the point. There's nothing that takes away from my experience of looking at his photography at all, except the photos that don't relate to what I think he wants to do as a photographer. So thanks, Phil. I hope you got something out of this, because I love this story and I'm dying to know more. I would like to be following this story. So I'm hoping that you're going to put more imagery up and you're going to keep shooting it. Adam shoots landscapes primarily in the American West. He's an accomplished photographer, as you can see, and we're going to look at his website and talk about it because it's very different. Now, a couple of reactions that I have to Adam's site just right off the bat is that I want bigger pictures. I want to really see these photos. I'm distracted by the design of this page because there's so much going on beyond the photos. There's the photograph behind it, which to me takes away from the photos that's showing. There's the repetition of his name on the top left and along the right side, and I'm not sure what's going on there. I love these photos. I mean, these are the photos if I'm sitting in a terribly gray office on a typical New York gray day with tons of snow on the ground. Oh man, I'd like to imagine myself in these photos. But I'm distracted. There's too many things going on here. And to me, they don't promote the photographs as much as they should be, especially how accomplished these photos are. We also get into a couple of the things I personally don't like, the watermark at the bottom on the right, the black background. I think that takes away from the work. I think that brings down the incredible joyousness of the way he photographs nature and the bright, brilliant color in his pictures. I also find that the structure of the page itself, where he has the about towards the bottom and the photograph, those should be in a category along the top. I want to look at these photos. I don't want to be distracted by other things. So I think that there should be another category that's about, and that shows his photo and has a little thing that he's written about and tells me about who he is, but it shouldn't be at the bottom of this page because honestly, if you're looking at a laptop, you're not even noticing that that's there. You're seeing the photo, you're not noticing what's below, and if you're not noticing what's below, then it shouldn't be there because not everybody is looking at a desktop large monitor. People look at things on small devices, they look at things on iPads, they look at things on laptops, and this wouldn't even show up in the frame.
So Stella, would your general advice to people, photographers building websites, to be basically to design their site for their intended
Oh,
audience?
absolutely.
So if your intended audience is photo editors who are at desktops, maybe one size is more appropriate than another, or if your intended audience is simply fans of nature photography, your intended audience, your site design might be different based on that difference in audience.
I don't think you can say it that cut and dry because you don't know who your audience is. You don't know who's going to be looking. You might know your audience or think you know your audience, but then there's the serendipity of people who just like to look at your site. What I would say, though, is that you can't be sure that all this information that you think is on your front page will be seen. And if it won't be seen, then put it in a category so it can be seen. You know, if you have a handheld device and you're looking at this page, you'll see the tree, the beautiful tree. You're not going to see the photo and the about. So it shouldn't be there. And if you see it, it's going to be so tiny that people like me won't even be able to read it anyway. So I would say bring a category up to the top and put it there. Let the photography just be the photography. It's so lovely. And it's so, especially for people who live in urban areas during the winter when we have enough snow. Believe me, all of us are sitting there going, man, would I like to be sitting on that ridge over there, just sitting. Let us do that. Don't give us all these other things to distract us from the experience of being in your photos because you have beautiful photography. So thank you for that. Now, John is a different photographer because he's a biology and ecology professor. So he has a different purpose with his work. He's not looking to photograph necessarily for magazines. He's really looking to have his work out there to be a resource for natural imagery. But I have a problem here again with the clutteredness of this page and the clutteredness of the categories. I am not a fan of personal favorites because to me the first thing that says is you don't really like your other images. And if you don't like them, why should I like them? You know, you don't have to highlight parts of your portfolio. If your work is good, and your work is good, let people just look through it. Don't direct them in a way that makes them think that some things have more value than others. Again, copyright at the bottom. If you're afraid of people stealing your work, then you need to rethink whether your work should be on the web, because ultimately I could crop your watermark out of these pictures and steal them anyway if I wanted to. Not that I would, but because of that, why do that? You can have a statement on your site with a copyright symbol saying that these are your photos, and there are ways of finding out if your photos are being used without your permission on the web. There are programs, there are things that you can use so you can follow up with that. But this is extraordinary stuff, and if I worked for Smithsonian or Audubon, or were working on a story about the natural world, I'd like to know that you exist, that I can contact you and either buy a photo or find out if you have pictures of something. In my past, I was in situations like that frequently, looking for images of a certain animal or a certain insect. And I'd like to know your work is there, but I want the work to be clear. So white background again. And for me, the categories of gear and workflow and cart and lightbox and client area are just too much. I would make the suggestion that you might want to start a blog where you talk about your gear and you talk about your workflow and you talk about the actual experience of what you're shooting, but that you let your website just be a resource for the photography itself. Because you obviously know what you're doing, and anybody who knows nature photography can tell how unique and difficult it is to get the kind of pictures that you have. It requires incredible patience, incredible knowledge, and incredible ability as well. And you don't want these other things taking away from it. The other thing is when you say personal favorites, what if they're not my personal favorites? You know, you've already created, without realizing it, sort of an antagonistic situation here. And you don't want to do that. You just want to say, you know, basically what you're saying with these photos is, have you ever seen anything as beautiful as this moose, caribou, I take it back, in the mountains? I can't say that I have. So give people a chance to really see your work. Take the other stuff that's more technically oriented or more about what you're doing and put it in a blog that you can click on from your website. And we'll give those people that are interested in that a chance to see it. But make things clearer and cleaner for the rest of us to look at your work.
Stella, just quickly, I know that a lot of photo editors sort of go back and forth on whether they like this or not like this, but do you like knowing a little bit about the image right there on the portfolio?
Generally, no. There's a tendency for people to caption things, but the caption doesn't make you like the picture better. However, for these kind of things, it is important, I think, to know where and what you have in the photograph. But I don't need to know that something was shot in Paris in the fall. That doesn't make the photo better. For nature photography, it is a quick way for people to be able to ID what there is that they're looking at, and it can be really crucial to know that it is a caribou and not a moose. So I'm okay with it there.
So if you were looking for this to buy an image of a specific thing for stock
Oh, it'd be
purposes.
great because he has a search engine, so I could search and this picture would come up if I put a mountain caribou, and that's terrific. And I do appreciate that, but you know, if you've photographed in Cuba, you don't have to say Cuba, or you don't, and you don't have to say woman outside store in Cuba. Now, you might think that that helps your SEO, but it depends on who your audience is. If you're looking for an editorial audience, it's not going to do anything for them because that's not how they look for imagery. If you're using it in a stock setting, it can work for you, but then it should be created differently in the portfolio. It should be a gallery for stock and not a portfolio that you're presenting in other situations.
So you're a proponent of keeping the portfolios a tightly edited sort of cross section of your work,
Hmm.
and then having the sort of stock archive be, searchable, purchasable,
Absolutely.
SEO captioned and keyworded, but just that there's a distinction between your portfolio is your best stuff, the stuff you're selling yourself on,
Mhm.
and the stock is the sort of
This,
archive and
yes,
the
yes, but not every photographer needs to have a stock gallery, and you need to think about that also. Do you really have enough images? Are your images the kind of work that you want to be showing for stock? Maybe, maybe not. In this situation, it would work great. But if you're a travel photographer, what kind of travel do you photograph? Because if you look around at travel magazines, they are predominantly high end. So if you're not shooting high-end things when you travel, then having a stock gallery is not maybe the best idea.
and just out of curiosity, I'm interested to see how much John has on his stock archive. And so is this, in your opinion, enough to
Oh yeah,
have
this
on
is
stock?
great. When I was at Newsweek, this is the sort of stuff that I frequently had to look for. And in those days, there were tons of stock agencies, so you would just go straight to a stock agency. I used to always want to try to find photographers who had archives, because then I knew I'd get images that no one else would have. But it wasn't that easy back in the old days before the internet became as big as it is. So he's got a great resource here. But the stock is different than the portfolio itself, and I like to just look at the pictures and not be distracted. Thank you, John. I hope that helped. Now, Marie-Louise Avery is a food and lifestyle photographer who lives in London. And she has a specific purpose in her work here, which is a gallery of images for stock. Beautifully presented. The tiles here, I can tell what's in these, so I know what it is if I click on it. But the problem I have, the suggestion that I would make is number one, I hate the black background. What is it? What's with black, folks? It's it's depressing right now for me to look at, especially when I'm looking out the window in New York. It's gray out there. Why do I want to look at black background? I want white. I want to imagine spring. And I also don't understand the watermark in the middle of the image. I know it's an issue about being concerned that people will take your work, but honestly, if I was looking for food images, and in my time as a photo editor, I frequently did, I wouldn't bother looking through your site because I'm just too distracted by the watermark. If you're that worried about people stealing your images, I don't know what to say to you. I honestly don't. You have beautiful work, and I love looking at your work. I'm very distracted by the watermark, and I'm amazingly distracted by the signature, the type itself, the floweriness of the type. Also, when I look at several of the images, I barely even see it, this image, for example, so I don't understand why it's there. Not that I think it should be in a way that I can see it, but if you're really being honest about it, if it's not showing up, what's the point of it? So I think you've got great images, and if I was searching for food photos, I would want to search your site. But I would be so distracted by the fact that I immediately think that you don't trust me because you have this watermark, and you have the watermark right in the middle of the image. And I don't like feeling that way when I'm looking at a photographer's work. My feeling is that we all have to get over the idea of people stealing our stuff. I put things on my website, I say things, I put stuff out there, and I have accepted the fact that it's out there and I don't really have control of it once it's out there. But that's okay with me because I believe that I can bring something when the time matters that isn't recreated by people taking stuff from my site. So I could take a photo from your site, but it isn't the experience of having you photograph something. So I have allowed myself to not worry about people stealing things I say or do or think about. And I like living that way much better. So thank you for letting me talk about your site, Mary Louise. And the work is beautiful, and I am getting hungry looking at it. Chris, you're going to talk a little about PhotoShelter.
And for those of you who are interested in PhotoShelter's portfolio capabilities, portfolio is actually something relatively new to PhotoShelter, and we think it's unique and really great. The some of the best things about the PhotoShelter portfolio is that there are lots of different customization options. You can change the transition between the images from a swipe transition to a fade transition. And because PhotoShelter portfolios aren't based on Flash, they look great on the iPad and the iPhone, and they're great for cross compatibility over mobile devices. And although Stella might disagree with featuring 10 galleries in portfolio, you can do that if you have a very diverse body of work, and
Yeah.
we wouldn't stop you from doing it. One of the very, very unique things about PhotoShelter portfolios is that they come with PhotoShelter's entire suite of image delivery, e-commerce, and archiving tools, such that you can have your portfolio site and your archive in one web property. And you can have your edit for people, for image buyers and potential clients to look at in your portfolio. And you can have the e-commerce capabilities, the archivability, and the SEO that's generated by an archive with literally the sky is the limit, tens and or if not hundreds of thousands of images. Um, and if you like, there is a standing offer for a 14-day trial. You get 14 days to try out PhotoShelter for $1. If you're interested to learn more exactly how the portfolios are set up, you can visit us on our Vimeo site. It's vimeo.com/PhotoShelter. There's a little bit of a typo in the link there. And we are out of time for the webinar, but we will be taking questions. If you have a question for Stella, she'll be taking questions live on our Facebook page and also on Twitter with the hashtag StellaQ&A. So you can get tweeting and visit us on facebook.com/PhotoShelter. And Stella will be in there in a few minutes asking, and you'll be asking and she'll be taking your questions.
I want to thank everybody for listening. If you want to get a hold of me, once again, you can email me at info@stellakramer.com. Check my website at stellakramer.com. My Twitter feed is StellaZine, StellaZine, or check out Stella Kramer Consulting on Facebook and friend me. Hope to hear from people. Thanks again for joining us today, and I hope you learned stuff, and I hope it was good for you. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Stella.